Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this webinar called Step by Step, the Higg FEM Verification Trail, Section 3, Energy and Greenhouse Gases. We from Leadership and Sustainability are looking forward to spending the next hour with you. This is the second in a series of webinars where we will take you into depth into the different sections of the Higg FEM, the Facility Environmental Module. But before we begin, let's check the audio quality. Can you hear me well? Would you please send me a comment in the question function? Okay. It seems that you can hear me well. Great. My name is Karin Ekberg, and I'm the founder and manager of the consulting company Leadership and Sustainability. I have spent nearly 35 years in the sustainability area, worked in many different sectors, but during the past 10 years, I have focused on the textile sector. Before I started my own company a few years ago, I worked several years at Adidas in the role of Head of Environmental Services, developing and implementing the first environmental strategy with inclusion of all business functions. We will now have a brief look at how to use the GoToWebinar features. You are all on mute today in order to ensure audio quality. Towards the end of the webinar, we will have time for a discussion, so please send us your questions throughout this webinar. If you wish to do so, then please use the question function. The presentation will be available for download after the webinar, and it will also be possible to watch the recording. You will receive an email with the details a few days after the webinar. But now let's get started. Today, I will introduce you to the SAC Higg FEM, the Facility Environmental Module, continuing with Section 3, the Energy and Greenhouse Gas section. After you have gained an insight into this section, I will present you also with some of the energy best practice examples, and then we have time for your questions and a discussion. And afterwards, I would like to briefly introduce you to a new opportunity of benchmarking with Higg FEM, and finally, we will make you an offer and present our team to you. And now let me introduce you to the verification trail. The purpose of the Verification Trail, this webinar series, is to give you a better and deeper understanding of the Higg FEM. We will take you through the Higg FEM section by section and make you acquainted with all requirements. We held the first webinar in September about site info and permits. And before we continue our trail, I would like to give you an overview of the verification process in general. We have identified 7 simple process steps I would briefly like to go through with you now. So you begin by engaging a verifier and provide information on your company and the levels that you have achieved in the self-assessment, for example, if you have already done the self-assessment. So items 1 and 2 on this slide here, you may do the self-assessment first and then engage the verifier, or vice versa. And once you have completed the self-assessment, you can make the self-assessment available to the verifier. And also you need to have the VFEM module as well. So you have your FEM module and you also have your VFEM module. So you need both modules if you want to verify. And then the verifier will review the self-assessment and all the documents that you have uploaded to the platform, and will inform you about any issues before the verification, and will of course also send you an agenda ahead of the on-site visit. And then we have the on-site verification, and we have the reporting, the finalization of the verification, and also you can post your results. SAC has issued a protocol for on-site verification, which gives information about the verification process. And you can see the link here, down here. So you will receive it. Once you have received this deck, you can click on those links as well. Then some general, but still very important advice to all of you who are doing your self-assessment or are preparing to get verified. Appoint a person who is responsible to complete the Higg FEM self-assessment on an annual basis. Read the How to Higg and the verification preparation guidance for facilities. The How to Higg is a very long document, I'm aware of that, but it is also very helpful in order to understand the questions and what is expected. So there is quite a lot of detailed guidance in the How to Higg. Then respond to the questions comprehensively and document all responses, and please also upload as many documents as possible. SAC requires documentation proof for nearly all questions. The SAC guidance on how to verify the How to Higg guidance is very strict regarding documentation. And also it is much easier for the verifier to prepare for the verification if it's possible to have a look at the documents beforehand. And in any case, during the verification, so you should have all documents available. And then be clear when setting targets and baselines. Baselines, you need to define them well. They should also be stable. So for example, you choose a baseline year of 2017, and then you will set your annual goals comparing with 2017, also moving forward. Be aware of the time you need to invest into filling out the self-assessment. And of course, the ultimate goal is to have improvements every year, year by year. So let's continue on the trail. Here you can see an overview of all the sections that are included in the FEM module. On September 3, we went through sections 1 and 2, and now we move on to the third section, energy and greenhouse gas. So let's have a look at the third section, energy and greenhouse gases. The largest man-made sources of air pollution and greenhouse gases derive from energy production and energy use. Taking climate change as the most severe human, environmental and economic risk into consideration, governments may impose more stringent requirements and regulations. So if your facility reduces its energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, it will help to reduce also its exposure to such regulatory risks and requirements, but it will also help save costs. The energy section in the Higg FEM promotes the implementation of a successful energy program and also evaluates a facility's progress. So to achieve this, it requires a strong focus on operational activities, as well as how resources are used while reducing the impact on the environment. This includes to track all energy and fuel sources and report quantity used in the last calendar year. Identify which factors contribute most to energy use on site. Set a normalized baseline for energy use. You can set also an absolute baseline if you wish. We will talk a bit more about that later. And also set normalized targets for energy reduction. You can set absolute targets as well if you wish. Set an action plan with specific actions. This is of course very important. It's not enough to just set targets. If you don't have an action plan on how to reach your targets, you may not be able to reach them. And then to demonstrate energy reductions against the baseline. And we will dive deeper into these requirements now during this webinar. So let's have a look at energy sources. You see here an overview of potential energy sources that are owned or controlled by your facility. These must be tracked. It also includes energy sources that are not used in the manufacturing process, such as, for example, canteens, dormitories, etc. To make sure you measure your energy sources accurately, we provide you also with a link to the greenhouse gas protocol that gives you further guidance. So these energy types used in your factory on site, they belong to what is called Scope 1, according to the greenhouse gas protocol. So next to own generated energy sources, there is also the option to purchase electricity, chilled water or steam. And I'm sure most of you do that. And those energy sources, they are called Scope 2 energy sources, according to the greenhouse gas protocol. Now, taking a closer look at your facility, here are a few of the common machines and equipment which use energy, such as boiler, compressed air system, motors, generators, HVAC, heat and ventilation and air condition devices, incinerators, chillers and burners, dryers, lighting, production equipment. So as a consequence, your factory's energy use generates direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see also in this picture. So these emissions are divided into 3 different scopes according to Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Scope 1 are all direct greenhouse gas emissions, for example, from fuels used in boilers. Scope 2 are all indirect greenhouse gas emissions from consumption of purchased electricity, heat or steam. And then we have scope 3. Those are all other indirect emissions, such as the extraction and production of purchased materials and fuels, transport-related activities in vehicles not owned, etc. And the Higg FEM tool provides also a greenhouse gas calculation for both scope 1 and scope 2. So identifying and managing the source and amount of greenhouse gas emissions can benefit your factory in several ways. Reduce energy cost. So energy is actually one of the most easiest way to save costs as well. It's a strong linkage, of course, between energy consumption and energy cost. You can also increase competitive advantage. You can get a start on future regulations on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also all about environmental stewardship, so managing environmental resources well. And then we have the different sections in the energy and greenhouse gas area. We have 3 levels here. At level 1, it's only about tracking your energy sources. And then at level 2, you can see here there are lots of other questions, baselines, targets, improvement plans, and also improvements. And at level 3, we have 1 question regarding scope 3 emissions. So let us now walk through the energy and greenhouse gas section step by step and question by question. The first requirement deals, and this is now the level 1, it's the first and only question at level 1 in the energy section. And the first requirement deals with the selection of all sources of energy for your facility with corresponding questions according to your energy source. Does your facility track its energy use from this source? What quantity of energy was used by this source in 2018? Which method was used to track this energy source? Are you using bills? Are you using meters? Any other, are the quantities estimated? What was the frequency of the measurement? And then you also have the opportunity to provide any additional comments. The intention of the first level is that the measurement of all energy sources allows you to analyze the biggest energy drivers, detect any abnormal consumption, set energy reduction targets, and measure greenhouse gas emissions. You will receive full points if you are completely tracking all sources of energy that your facility uses, both scope 1 and scope 2. And you will receive partial points if you're completely tracking at least one of your energy sources, but are not yet tracking all of your energy sources. At level 2, the first question, has your facility set baselines for energy use? And the intent of this question is, it's important to know what your starting point is. Therefore, a baseline provides you with an overview and a clear reference point for ongoing energy performance tracking and target setting. During the verification, we will ask you to explain how the baseline was calculated. Was it absolute or normalized? We will ask you about unit of measure. We will check this. The drop-down list contains unit of measures only for absolute baselines only, unfortunately, but you can still add normalized values and describe how the baseline was calculated. So here you can see a screenshot of what the window looks like where you can enter this information. And I also wanted to give you an example of a normalized baseline and how to calculate that. In our setting here, we consumed 1 million kilowatt hour, of electricity, and we produced 500,000 garments, and the year here was 2017. In order to calculate the normalized baseline electricity usage, we divide the electricity consumption by the production volume in 2017. And this is how we achieve the result of 2 kilowatt-hour per garment. So it's quite a simple division that you make, but it's of course it's important that you have the quantities correct from the outset, and also that you have evaluated if this normalization, if it also makes sense to you. So if you have very similar products that you produce in your factory, it may make sense. If you have very different products, some very small products that can be produced very fast, and some larger products, and perhaps the ratio between those two different product groups, they are changing a lot, then it might be difficult to measure just with a number of garments. And you may want to use standard time instead. And also comment regarding absolute or normalized values. When setting targets related to energy consumption in manufacturing, it often makes sense to normalize the targets. For example, to calculate the energy consumption per production unit, as we just did. This way, if your production goes down or up, you will not be punished or suddenly credited for something you couldn't influence. With normalized targets, you can make sure that you have comparable results even though production goes down or up. So for example, one year you are working at 100% of your capacity. The next year, perhaps you are working only at, let's say, 90% of your capacity. So you are producing much less garments. And then you would also probably reduce your energy consumption. But that reduction would only be based on the lower production volumes you have and not on savings that you would have, where you would really have implemented measures to save energy. So it would not be a really fair comparison. So let's see. Then the next question number 3. And this question is about, does your facility know what facility processes or operations use the most energy? The intent here is, to begin with, a facility must be able to evaluate its energy uses by completing an entire facility analysis. It discovers where in your facility you use the most energy. With this disclosure, strategies can be developed to reduce the energy usage and also prioritize the most relevant factors. So if you know which machines, which departments that use the most energy, then you can put your most efforts there. And a first step would be to map out your production processes together with a list of all machinery installed. And then your energy use parameters and energy use data. You may wish to evaluate also if you possibly need to have more meters installed in order to be able to measure actual consumption at a more detailed level. And this analysis is really important because when you begin to decide which measure you want to take in order to save energy, of course, you want to focus on the most energy intensive processes or operations. And the next question, based on that, you can set your targets for improving energy use or greenhouse gas emissions. And if you have done so, you can select the sources of energy for which your facility has set an energy or greenhouse gas reduction target. And in order to get full, and this is what it looks like, here is a screenshot of the table that you can complete. In order to get full score here, you need to target more than 80% of your consumption when setting goals. So remember that if you set targets, do make sure that you cover at least 80% of your total energy consumption. If you target less than 80%, but still more than 50%, you will receive partial points. And as you can see here, the target that you should insert should be minus if you want to save, and in percentage. So in this case, it had been a target set with -3% savings to be saved in 2019. The next question is about the implementation plan. And as I mentioned, this is really an important element of your program. So does your facility have an implementation plan to improve energy use and/or greenhouse gas emissions? And you also need to upload a copy of the plan. So answer yes if you have an implementation plan in place that demonstrates that you are taking action to achieve your targeted reductions. And answer partially yes if you have a plan but have not started on all action items. And here you can see a screenshot of some elements of such an implementation plan. And the How to Higg actually has a template for you available. You can click on the link at the bottom of this slide, and you can download the Excel table with the implementation plan. So the intent of this question is to maintaining an action plan. It supports you with target setting and is an important step in managing your energy use. But it also means that your site might take action to make reductions. And so when you complete this table, you make sure that you know which measures you want to take. You also make sure that you have someone who is responsible for it, and also what are your deadlines. And obviously, if you set an annual target, you should not just monitor on an annual basis. So at the end of the year, check if you have saved energy. Really, of course, you need to do this on at least a monthly basis to make sure that you can really reach your target. And if you are not doing that, you need to take other measures, additional measures. And then the question 6, has your facility improved energy consumption compared with its baseline? If yes, select all sources of energy that have been improved. So here it is suggested to upload an energy tracking report showing reductions for energy sources from the last calendar year. And again, to achieve full points here, if reductions have been made in the last calendar year, then you have to have savings that make up 80% or more of your total energy use. And you get partial points if you have between 50 and 79%. Then here is an example what it will look like. So we will ask you during the verification to see all the items that you see here in this list. And we also think that it would make sense to use Excel to keep all your data in Excel and keep it on an annual basis, and always use the same, and keep also all your calculations in there, including baseline years, baseline year calculations, target calculations, etc., so that you have everything in one place. And now here, question 7 is already the last question in the energy section. Were your facility's annual Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions calculated in 2018? And here you can report if you have calculated your Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and also describe your Scope 3 calculation. This question is actually not scored. So if you answer no here, you will not lose any scores. You will still be able to reach 100 scores in this section. And just as an example, calculating Scope 3 emissions for factory operations, it's a very, very advanced practice. It can provide useful insights and also support your own reporting. And here you can see an example of potential Scope 3 emissions. So in the list here, purchased goods and services, capital goods, waste generated in operations, business travel, employee commuting, etc. They all belong to Scope 3. And now I would like to give you just a few examples that are relevant for your facility's energy consumption. And I would like to show you an energy use breakdown as well as how typical, and then after that, we also have some best practice examples from the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and their report on energy best practices for textile mills. So let us go there. Facilities are equipped with and demand various sources of energy. The shown pie charts here, they show a breakdown of typical electricity and thermal energy use in a composite textile plant to give you a general overview. So you see here, for instance, that spinning consumes the largest share of electricity in this particular breakdown. And then, which is followed by weaving. And when it comes to thermal energy, wet processing like desicing and bleaching combined with finishing consume the greatest share, in this case of 35%. So this is the type of breakdown that you can also make when you decide where to put your efforts. And then over to NRDC and some of their best practice examples. The NRDC conducted 5 expert efficiency assessments of real-world manufacturing practices, and they identified incentives that would immediately make typical production processes more efficient and deliver substantial environmental improvement at the same time. To minimize losses and achieve the best practices demonstrated above, specific engineering improvements to factory infrastructure are required. According to NRDC, a mill that implemented all of the recommended energy best practices identified would save up to 1,200 kilograms of coal per ton of production, representing between 11 and 31% of its total fuel use. So if it's not coal you are using, it can be diesel oil or electricity. And to pick a few of those examples, let's have a look. So for example, recover heat from hot rinse water, for instance, refers to the large quantities of very hot water used to rinse fabric. This heat can be beneficially captured and used for preheating the incoming water for the next hot rinse. And then if you use coal, to pre-screen coal, a spiral coal screen technology greatly increases the rate of separation of good and bad quality coal, which also increases the calorific value of the fired coal. And then we have also an area where you can save up to 5% of the total energy. So leak detection to save energy by making sure that you have no leaks, preventative maintenance, and also improved cleanings. We also have, for example, energy savings from the reuse of condensate, but there are also many other measures. So for example, lighting, to change to LED lighting is something that we see a lot in garment factories. And also, for example, to change to servo motors for sewing machines, if you have sewing machines and in a garment factory. And so there are many other measures than just those reflected here. So please go, there is the link available here at the bottom of this slide. Please go and have a look at their study. And it's actually quite interesting to read. And with that, I would like to open up for questions and discussions. So I hope that you have a lot of questions for me. So let me see if I can open up here. Here we go. Yes, about the slides. Yes, of course. So all of you who are attending or have registered, you will receive an email after this webinar with the presentation and also with this recording. And here we have one question. The energy is used in different areas. Should we take only the energy consumption in production? No, I would suggest that you take all your energy consumption. So not only the actual production, but also infrastructure, offices you have, so that you have a complete picture of your total energy use. Is energy audit a must to capture this data? And you can do an internal energy audit as well. There are approaches available where you can use a checklist to conduct your own energy audit. It is of course also possible to use external consultants for that. And then here we have one comment also. Hi, I think the meter unit of fabric is a bad unit to track performance in textile factories. Yes, I agree with you. I think it is quite difficult to do this because it also depends a lot about the processes you have. If you have a lot of different units and different processes, it may be difficult to use the meter unit of fabric. And but it is also in general, I must say, it is really a challenge to find the best measure to normalize. And it's, I think often you need to tailor make it to your own production and find out what is the best way for you. You can of course also compare with absolute values, but as I mentioned, if your production goes up or down, it may really it may not give comparable results if you use only absolute values. So it's a bit of a trial and error, I think. And how we verify those quantities. So we do that by looking at your production records and at your energy records, your energy bills, for example, to have a look at your meter and their records. And then I have one question here as well. What % of factories are using Higg to its full extent? Could you please just explain perhaps what you mean by that? You mean using it at all levels? So it has been possible for the factories to move up to levels 2 and 3. And as you know, just as a comment, if you don't reach level 1, if you don't respond yes or partly yes to all questions at level 1, it will not be possible for you to move up to levels 2 and 3, section by section. So there is a gateway there. And if you need to calculate indirect greenhouse gas emissions, so your scope 2, I guess you mean by that. And actually, the Higg platform, the module should calculate your greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 and scope 2 combined based on your input into the tool. And then a question about how to measure scope 3. Yes, it's very detailed, and you saw the list of all the different emissions that would go in there. So it's a very detailed study you need to make. It's quite complicated, and you need to collect a lot of data, of course, from your external providers as well. I have one question here. Is there a benchmark on target setting, for example, 3 years versus 5 years? No, there is no such benchmark. It's really up to you as a factory to set your targets for 3 years or 5 years or perhaps even 10 years, although it's a very long-term perspective. You know also that in the EMS section, the question 2 there about strategy, you do need to have a strategy that reaches at least 3 years into the future, which means also that you do need to have energy goals that at least reach 3 years into the future. But it's really up to the factory to decide if you want which time period beyond 3 years that you want to have. No, you don't need to go for a greenhouse gas audit. It's not required. And the question 7, as I mentioned, it's not scored, the question about the scope 3 emissions. And then a question about what's the formula to set up a reduction target? A really good question. There is no such formula. What is important is that you have done the analysis of your different energy consumption so that you know where your energy consumption, where your highest energy consumption factors are. But then also when you decide about the reduction target, you need to consider what is your potential to reduce your energy consumption. So for example, if you have done nothing so far, perhaps you have a bit of an older factory where there are machines that could be replaced or renewed, or where you could replace the motors, for example, then there may be a significant potential to reduce your energy consumption. However, for factories that have already saved a lot of energy over the past years, it usually gets more difficult to save energy as you move forward. So this is also something that needs to be taken into account. And then, of course, also, when you have seen where your highest energy consumption lies, you need to evaluate what can I replace, what can I do to save energy. And for example, to change to LED lighting in garment factories, to change to servo motors are quite low-hanging fruits that you can do. But so you need to basically make this analysis and also make a cost analysis of the different implementation measures and changes that you can make and value them against the actual saving that you can do. And usually you would probably be calculating with also return on investment and payback time. So depending on your own factory, you may have specific payback times that you need to reach. So for example, if you would like to install a solar panel to move over to renewable energy sources, if you have a payback time of 15 years, it may be difficult for the factory to allow that. They maybe have lower targets for the payback time. But as I said, there is no specific formula really that you can use. There are a lot of factors that you need to weigh in. And then base year, how many years we can go back maximum? This is also a really good question. And so the How to Higg guidance, it doesn't specify how many years back you can go. And so I have seen a few factories that actually have baseline years of perhaps 2010, 2011, 2012, which means going back quite a few years. But also when you go back many years, and then it gets more and more diffuse, so to say, and it gets more and more difficult to track. And so I think it makes sense to, from time to time, set a new baseline. So for example, if you usually define your strategy by 5 years, then you would set a, let's say you define a strategy for 2025, and your starting year is 2020, then you could take your baseline year 2019, and your goal, then long-term goal, is 2025. And then when you come toward 2025, you would of course revise your strategy and take a new baseline. So but we see very different practices. There are actually factories that also change baseline year nearly every year, which I think is more difficult because then you don't have a stable comparison to have. Yes, and then we have the question about normalized and absolute target. And this is going back to the discussion about absolute and normalized. So if you have an absolute target, you have a certain energy consumption in 1 year, let's say it's 100%. and you want to save energy 2% in absolute numbers, then in the next year, your goal would be to have 98% of the energy that you consumed in the year before. And so this would then be an absolute target measured in megawatt hours, for example. The normalized target, that is when you relate the absolute consumption to your production or to something else. So what we see, for example, in offices or in distribution centers, you can relate your absolute values, your absolute consumption values with, for example, number of employees or, for example, square meters. But usually in production units, in factories, since you are producing a product, it makes sense to try to relate the absolute number to your actual production volumes. And when you do that with a calculation example that I showed you with a 2 kilowatt hour per garment, that would then be a normalized value. So then your goal would be not the 100 to 98% in megawatt hours, but it could be the 100 to 98% in terms of megawatt hours per garment produced. And then we have the question about how to set the baseline if you plan to shift the facility or building. So this is pretty difficult. If you are going to change building, if you are adding buildings, if you are adding machines, if you are adding people, then it is really difficult. So then it might be better to wait until you have done the change and then set the new baseline. Or, for example, to make an estimation of, let's say you had 5,000 sewing machines, and now you are going to expand your manufacturing with another 2,000 sewing machines. And then perhaps you could change your baseline accordingly, just linear, so to say, with that. But it's a very good question, and it's not easy. It's not easy to set targets when your manufacturing is changing. Okay, so there are some more questions, but I think we need to continue now. So the other questions that I haven't responded to here, I have also one question here. Let's take this one. We have answered all the questions in level 1, 2, and 3, but in the left side bar diagram, it's showing only up to level 1. That is quite strange that happens. So usually you should see the all bars, so to say, for levels 1, 2, and 3. So I cannot say exactly what has happened here, and it may be that you need to contact Higg to contact the support function to find out what the problem is here. All right, so thank you for the questions. And as I said, the questions that I haven't responded to here now, I will respond to you in after this webinar. So thanks a lot for that. And then let's continue with just some more information for you. So I also wanted to tell you that there is a tool that the Higg Co makes available to you, and that's the Higg FEM benchmark. So the Higg.org platform currently offers benchmarking for the Higg facility environmental module. The Higg FEM benchmarking feature on Higg.org currently includes industry benchmarking as well as energy, water, and waste section charts, and compares your own Higg FEM or shared Higg FEM self-assessment and verified assessments with other facilities in the industry. So here, down at the bottom of this slide, you can find the link to the benchmarking guide, and there are also videos available to what is available for you. And on this screenshot, on this screenshot, you can see an example of what it can look like. So it's a bit difficult to read here, but if you go to this guide, you will find more information there. So you can basically select the type of facility you have, etc. So you have many different criteria that you can select for, and then you can be compared directly with your peers within your group. And before I close, I have some more information to you about our offers. So we offer training and verification in many countries, and we have been verifying in several of the countries listed here. So if you are interested in verification, please get in touch. Please begin planning and scheduling your verification early. So now it's already end of October. So if you are still wanting to verify, please make sure that you plan for that very, very soon. Time is beginning to run out now. And then also, we have already held several webinars about the Higg FEM. So here you can find the links if you want to listen to, for example, the first webinar in this series, where we looked at site info and permits. And there are also a few others, for example, specifically about what to expect on the day of your Higg FEM verification. And finally, the last webinar here is not about the Higg FEM, it's more about management systems and why management systems are really helpful to drive performance improvement. And so if you are interested, please keep in touch and please contact us. You can go directly to our booking page here and just book a time slot for a call with me, or you can email us, either me for global or in Turkey, you can email Aladdin, or in Bangladesh, for Bangladesh, you can email Hafiz. And we have come to our final slide. So this is one slide about our company, and here you see some of our team members. We also work with additional verifiers and additional freelancers globally. And with that, I would like to thank you so much. There will be a survey with a few questions available after this webinar. If you can respond to these questions, it would be really helpful for us to get your feedback. And we are so grateful for your input. So please take the time to respond to the survey. Thank you for joining us today, and goodbye. And as I said, you will receive an email with all information with the presentation and the recording in a few days from now. So thank you and goodbye.